So welcome everybody to another episode of Leaders Link. We had a short summer break. We're back and I'm thrilled to welcome so many people from around the world to this conversation. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Lindsay Levin. I'm the CEO and founder of Leaders Quest. Leaders Link are a series of conversations live streamed, as you can see, with leaders from around the world who have something special to share, important reflections on some of the biggest challenges of our time. And as many of you know, Leaders Quest work is all about helping leaders and companies align profit and purpose to deliver a future where everybody can thrive within the means of the planet. As we think about that, that's a pretty challenging notion right now. And I can think of nobody better to be opening up these September conversations with than you, Blair. So a huge welcome to Blair Sheppard. Blair is head of global strategy and leadership at PwC. He's a professor emeritus and dean emeritus at Duke University's School of Business. He's advised hundreds of companies, hundreds of governments, and of course, published books and articles. And Blair, we're really thrilled to have you here with us today to talk about your latest book, 10 Years to Midnight. I'll just hold that up for you. At a moment when we almost think that we're at 10 minutes to midnight.
Exactly. And happy to be here. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Big welcome. Thank you for making time for us. So the book is founded on the idea that we currently face 4 crises in the world.
Yes.
Or at least 4 major crises. Tell us briefly about those.
So we actually came to these begrudgingly, by the way. We didn't mean to come to them, and we just did. So really quickly, the first one you could think of as a crisis of prosperity, which is there's enough, because of the disparity that happens in the world, there's enough people across the entire lifespan whose future looks unhappy that we're worried they'll stop dreaming, imagining, thinking about things, and essentially we'll sort of psychologize our way into a depression. And it's everywhere in the world, and it's across the entire lifespan. So people about to retire with not enough resources, people entering the job market in a really terrible time, in many cases with massive debt, and then people in the middle who've taken on obligations that are trying to live a lifestyle kind of stretching and at risk of losing a job, right? Our guess is 40% of jobs in some places in the world will turn over in the next decade. So that's the first one. If people stop thinking the future is going to be good, then actually it becomes bad. Right? Second one is the unintended consequences of technology. And actually, Lindsay, the thing I think are most concerned about, which is what the Industrial Revolution is doing to the environment, is an example. When we created that and we started using carbon as the source of energy, no one knew that we were going to create a climate crisis. The problem, and this is to me why it's a crisis, is that it's been baked into every part of our life. It's how we farm, it's how we transport, it's how we build, how we manufacture, how we talk to each other, even how we vacation, right? And so the capacity of the system to change itself fast enough to mitigate the problem is really worrisome. Now, when you go to the next wave of technology, which is platform-based IT, it too has unintended consequences. So for example, the fastest growing cause of death in adolescent males is now suicide. And girls are not committing suicide, but they're self-harming. I promise when people created social media, they did not mean for that to occur, right? Telephones didn't mean for us to lose our short-term memories. It's a byproduct. But because it's embedded in our lives, it's hard to change. The third one is kind of a product of the first two, which is that people are losing faith in institutions. And so the Edelman data here is really pretty scary. 18% of the world's population they surveyed, which is I think about 100 countries, feel like the system's working for them, which means 82% feel it isn't. Right? Which is why we're seeing what we're seeing in terms of Black Lives Matters and Belarus and Hong Kong, all over the world, people are saying, I don't believe in the system. And the challenge with that one is when it isn't working, it's like water not working for fish, right? And then the final one is we call it a crisis in leadership. And the point here is we have an incredibly polarized society where it's hard to get agreement, working against problems as profound as I just described, with a set of leaders who were prepared for a world we're leaving versus the world we're in. And so and without people leading, we just won't make the changes we need. So those are the four crises, and they're getting hotter every day.
Right, and your book, of course, has come out in the midst of the pandemic of
Yes.
COVID. You've written a postscript in the book about it. You've been writing articles about it. I actually think it makes the book even more prescient. But could you just speak a little bit about how you see COVID as changing or accelerating or impacting on those crises?
Yeah, I think COVID's actually done two things. One positive one we'll get to later, I hope, but two negative things. The first one is it's created its own set of crises, right? So we have balance sheet problems for companies, we have debt for nations, and we have all the residual issues of small business failure and lost jobs and people pushed off a cliff. And the equivalent of that in companies. But what it's also done is accelerate the crisis, right? So I mean, it turns out there's somewhere, best guess, 120 million people we know of have been driven back into poverty. Right? It's going to be more when this is over, right? And then on the other hand, the tech, anyone who's invested in tech has actually dramatically increased their wealth in the last 6 months. And so the growth, the disparity between those who hold capital or regions that are well situated, or people who are older who have capital, and everyone else is growing as a result of COVID. We've moved to having conversations like this as the way we run our lives, and so we've pushed the platform world way faster than we thought we would. If you think about the kind of the leadership challenge, polarization in the world has grown. What nation states have learned is that essentially for national security and national resilience reasons, they've got to rejig their supply chains. And I think that means they're going to localize. And so there's going to be increased fracturing in the world. And I think the leadership challenge just got way harder. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So we have a double problem.
So, and you know, in the spirit of that leadership challenge and urgency, one of the concepts you talk about and think a lot about is what you call speed to scale.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Lindsay, I really mean speed to scope and scale, actually, right? And so just take the climate issue, right? We have to completely rework the industrial system from soup to nuts, which means we have to rework how we lead our lives. And we have to rethink it. We have to put the systems in place, and we have to be largely successful within 10 years. Because if we're not, the back end is really ugly, right? So we will burn the Earth's lungs, we will kill the coral, which means the Earth doesn't have a way of consuming carbon dioxide. And as the heat goes up, the amount of methane released in northern Canada and Russia accelerates. And so 10 years, if we think it looks unhappy now, 10 years from now, it's really unhappy. And so you have to crunch the time horizon. Normally, if I taught change of that scale when I was teaching at a business school, I'd say that'll take decades. We have a few years. And so in every one of the crises, what we have to do is think about getting to scope and scale at a huge speed. Another quick example, one of the people we read about in the book who's trying to get small business growth in India before COVID, right, and it's bigger now, said we need 10 million successful new businesses in India in the next decade. That's unimaginable, Lindsay, right? But we have to achieve it.
Right. I mean, I'd love you to say a little bit more about small businesses. I found that, you know, helpful. I mean, on the one hand, of course, they're in the most appalling crunch right now because of the economic crisis. But clearly, they're a massive engine in all sorts of ways, actually, for people leading purposeful lives and creating livelihoods and so on. And you focus a lot on this challenge of building small businesses. Can you say a little bit about some of the things that you would encourage us to think about in the spirit of creating small businesses?
Yeah, so the first point is the one you just made, right, which I think is the most important, actually, Lindsay, which is we need to think about small business for a whole host of reasons. One of them is that small businesses tend to be more socially centric because they're connected to a place, right? And if you think about back when capitalism was invented, Edinburgh, it was written in Edinburgh. And if you were an entrepreneur in Edinburgh, you went to church, you went to the market, you went downtown and met the people who you would harm if you did harm. And so there was more linkage between the person and their consequence, right? Second piece, I think, is that the models we've used actually won't work in the future in the way we thought about them. So massive scale replacing labor, for example, which China and Japan did, as a way to grow won't work for two reasons. First, people aren't buying. And second, they're competing with robots and AI. And therefore, that model has to be replaced. And I think the only way to do it is sort of think about local small business as the driver. And the final point is, if we're right that we're going to lose a massive number of jobs in large employers, which we kind of have to implement technology, the jobs have to come somewhere. So we're actually working in PwC at trying to figure out how to upskill the world. The problem is we upskill the world for no work, it doesn't work. And so we need tens of millions of small businesses to thrive in the future.
And right now, of course, we've all been thrown back into our local economies because of,
Yes.
of lockdowns and so on around the world. Thinking of people on this call, some of them working in very global jobs, some more local, but for those of us who are used to thinking big picture, share a little bit, your encouragement around our role locally as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point to this is it's not an anti-globalist statement, right? It's not denying interdependence, but the point basically is, because of the way we've run our economy, our political economy for the last 70 years, essentially we've allowed wealth to concentrate into particular regions and particular people, right? And so globalization had the unintended side effect of leaving a lot of the world behind. And we brought tons of people out of poverty, but at the same time, Northern England didn't achieve like London did, the Midwest didn't achieve like the coast did, Southern Europe didn't achieve like Northern Europe, Bangalore was great, and Calcutta not. And so the issue in part is, let me give you the analogy. I used to swim in college. Imagine the world got to a point where there are only 2 or 3 swimmers that were Olympic class, because they just pushed ahead of everybody else.
Right.
That's what's happening with the economy. The Olympics wouldn't be very interesting if that was the case. So how do you fix it? You'd actually have to start local swim clubs or local athletics club or gymnastics clubs. And then you'd compete there, then you go state or provincial, and then you go national, and you go international. So you'd start by thriving local sports clubs. Same thing, you've got to start by building thriving local communities, and then build global interdependence from there. And so we need to shift our focus to taking care of the local first, not to be nationalist or populist or separatist, but actually to say, garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't build strength in a bunch of places, eventually global is going to create disparity that's just unsupportable.
Part of what I appreciated, Blair, a lot about the book is it's super thoughtful. It's also very practical. And I found myself in different places, wanting to apply the lenses that you were using to
I'm glad for that.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I mean, super relevant. One of the things that I liked the most was your 6 paradoxes of leadership. And I'd actually, if we've got time, I'd love you to just run through those 6, because I think they will really strike people and really be a gift to people. So share with us how you see that.
So this is a test if I remember my own paradoxes, right? So let me give 2 that I think are particularly relevant today to start with, right? So if you think about the people who were really successful in helping us through COVID, right? They did 2 pretty remarkable tricks, right? The first one was they were humble enough to recognize they didn't know the answer to the problem. Right, and inclusive in that humility. So they said, we'll get health experts, epidemiologists, economists, business people, psychologists, civil society, and we'll bring them together and have them help us think about the answer to the problem, right? So they had the humility to seek input. But on the other hand, and by the way, when they did that, I promise you there was no obvious answer, right? But they had the courage to take a decision because they knew they had to. And so they had the heroism to say, I'm going to step out and put my career, my life at risk, my political life at risk, because I know I need to, because this matters, even though I'm probably wrong.
Right.
But then again, they had the humility to go back and actually say, I've got to see where we're wrong and correct midstream. So that's humble hero. Right. The other example of that is that actually there's some pretty serious technology in the question of how do we deal with COVID, but there's also a human system side to it, kind of a how are people going to respond to things question. And so the really good leaders were really very sophisticated about the technology of the disease and the moving understanding of the science. Right. And if you look at Angela Merkel, she was really very persuasive about the science of it all, right? And a pretty good techie. but at the same time, a deep appreciation for the human systems we're trying to change and move. Rarely do you get someone who's both a double E and a brilliant psychologist. They're usually separate from each other. So
Right.
it's putting technology savvy humanists together. Right? Then quickly, the other four are sort of the high integrity politician. I don't mean this in the job sense. It's actually people who can form coalitions, get people who disagree with each other on polar sides to come to agreement, but not lose their soul in the process.
Right.
Tradition innovator, which is people who actually have a deep appreciation for what was, but know the need to innovate. So think about the police force challenge and Black Lives Matters.
Right.
It's kind of going back to what makes policing good and right, and then innovating like crazy. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? The next one is kind of is you could think of sort of my job as irrelevant, which is a strategic executor. So people who actually strategize in the process of executing, and I missed the sixth one, and I did them all. I don't remember which one, but you get the idea.
Yes, yes. The high integrity politician, as you call it. Let's speak a little bit more about that.
Yes.
I mean, clearly we're all, many people are sort of in despair about politicians with a capital P.
Yes.
But give us a little bit more of a sense of what you mean about that, because all of us in different ways are about persuading and helping to shape
Yes. Yeah.
and needing to listen as we do that.
So here's the sixth one, by the way, and it's terrible because this is one I care deeply
No,
about.
I'm sure.
Globally minded localist. Right?
Okay, that's right.
And we could talk about that if you want. But if you think about this, the point about politician is really the following point, which is if the world is fracturing and if the world is polarizing, and if the problems are more complicated, we've got to bring very divergent views to bear on a problem. And by definition, they'll disagree with each other, right? They'll start with different starting points, different assumptions, different expertise. And so you have to be skilled at framing a negotiation, a problem solution, a coalition, an agreement. Right? The problem is you can spend so much time doing that, you forget why you did it in the first place. And actually, in order to attract the ability to do that, you need the integrity that people will say, I know that they're going to work with us, but actually they stand for something, they mean something, they have a purpose. And actually, I think in the big P sense, that's what we need in our politicians in particular. We need the ability to cross the aisle, but do so in a way where they're not losing their soul in the process.
Right, right. And so that globally minded localist, just give a little
Yes.
note of that too.
Yeah, so it's back to the point I was making, which is this set of problems are going to be solved kind of a village at a time, a city at a time, a town at a time. And therefore, you kind of have to care about a place deeply and take care of it. But the world's too interdependent to just worry about local. So it's sort of flipping the model I taught for years on its head, where we were teaching globalists and say, you had to be local. Actually, right. I'm not sure how you'd phrase it, but care about a place first and then be globally aware. And if we do that, then we've got a shot at solving these issues.
Right. Right. I mean, so another of the things I really appreciate with the book is you've taken a lot of complexity, and I have an inkling of how much hard work it is to whittle it away and, boil it down to these central concepts. Share with us a little bit why you decided to write the book now, and also how have you changed in the course of doing this lovely piece of work?
So first of all, I appreciate the compliment, by the way. I mean, so for example, how do you create a construct that covers Black Lives Matter, Yellow Vest, and Hong Kong, right? Which is, and to us, that was institutional trust, right? So in the process, you could lose some meaning, but I hope we got the important pieces. So the reason for writing it, I haven't written in 20 years. Because I was an academic, but then became an academic administrator, right? I became a dean, and I started to do corporate education, and I opened a campus in China. And so I was ready to hang up the spurs and never write again, right? And inside PwC, I had been trying to be behind the scenes and help the line leaders be successful. I think my job is to enable others, right? But it's just too damned important. And so I had to write it. I mean, I just had to write it. And so the biggest change is I'm scared. I'm hopefully scared, but I'm scared And I don't want to live the legacy from my grandkids that we're about to leave.
Right.
And so if you hear a little bit of passion behind this stuff, it's mostly that. And I mean, I came to it begrudgingly. We were actually just doing this stuff on the world feels gritty. How do we have to change our strategy? And we woke up one day and said, holy, and I won't use the word I literally use, but imagine a replacement for holy cow, this is really serious. And it's more urgent than we're talking about. So Lindsay, the key piece for me is I've developed a deeper sense of urgency than I've ever had. And then the other one is I think I'm care about, I'm being closer to the people who matter to me most, because we're gonna have to get through this together.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I really echo the urgency and the paradox, if you like, of needing to balance that with optimism and with vision.
Yes.
Otherwise,
Yes.
we simply won't be effective. As many people on the line know, we're deeply in this climate work right now at
Yes.
Leaders Fest, about to launch this huge global effort called Countdown. And every one of your paradoxes speaks to what we're seeing in that climate space.
Yeah.
And speaks to how we need, what it will take for us to get through and effect these massive transformations, where you kind of need to be confident about a North Star, and kind of coping with whatever gets thrown at you as you go. So it's very relevant. I share your heightened urgency.
The interesting thing, Lindsay, is the one thing that came out of COVID, by the way, is actually we learned we can do things massively and fast.
Right.
So if I had said to anyone on this call, we're going to shut down most of the world's economies overnight, no one would have taken that bet.
Right.
But we did. Right. And so I think the thing with and I don't think anyone imagined we could go to technology as a way to do business and live our lives as fast as we did. Right. So we've learned the lesson: you can do scope and scale quickly. We just have to apply it to the problems that are as urgent as the ones we're dealing with.
Right. So wonderful. I want to invite people now in with questions. Would love to get your questions from different places and different people. You'll see in the participant function at the bottom of your screen, you can stick your hand up there, or if you're on screen, you can wave your hand. I can't see everybody at once, but you can wave your hand and one of us, Beth or I, should spot you. So please, chance to ask a question, do the hand raise in the participants. Rosa, over to you, Rosa Martin.
Hi, Blair. Thank you so much. I was really struck by what you said at the start with your 4 crises, the one on, if people stop thinking about the future's going to be good, then it's going to become bad. And
Yes.
You mentioned imagination in that, and that felt quite hopeful to me. And of course, imagination can go both ways, but I was just wondering if you could share a little more on imagination and what you're seeing and what's exciting you and feels hopeful.
Yeah, actually, I think the interesting issue is that I gave this presentation to a group, and it was really dark. It was a day where I was just kind of depressed, right? So it was just really, really dark. And they said, that was the most uplifting presentation we've ever seen. And I said, what do you mean? That was apocalyptic. And they said, but actually, you've defined the problem. We now know what we have to tackle. And what occurred was this sort of wonderful sort of half-hour dialogue about what does it mean to tackle them, right? And the creativity in that was great. So I think, in a sense, the kind of ironic answer to your question is the old phrase that mother is a necessity of invention, right? I mean, crisis is a necessity of invention, mother of invention. And so we have a crisis, therefore we have to invent. And it's striking to see how creative people are getting. I think the second piece for me is it's actually what's happening is shareholders are coming to see that the long term is now short term. And they're forcing creativity in a way that we hadn't seen before. So you have the idea person who's doing it all over the world, everywhere in the world. There's some amazing stuff happening. And then you have the people who actually have the capital saying, we have no choice but to do it. When those two meet, the world can do some pretty fantastic things.
Other questions from people? Please go for it. Don't be shy. Beth, are you indicating somebody or yourself?
Yeah, I'll ask a question unless.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, Blair, thank you so much. One of the things I'm really struck by, I've been spending many years working in a very global role, and this concept of, starting with our own communities, and also the feeling of my own, personal loss of faith in institutions. And so when you look at that work at the local level and making things work, starting where you are, how do you, balance the need to change institutions and the need to work around them when they feel they're not fit?
That's a great question. So I think the first piece in what you said is that if there's a single piece of advice I think that comes from the book, it's find a place you love and do something to help it get better, right? And if you do that, you're going to run up against an institution that's failing, by the way. And actually, it's sort of the 1,000 points of light, but we're talking about billions of points of light, right? Which is, if we all do that and we all push the institution, what happens is it gets better. So if you think about it, what's the best way to improve elementary education is for parents to go after it, right? Now what's happening instead is a lot of parents are leaving and paying for private education around the world, right? And therefore leaving others behind. That's kind of an unacceptable answer, because what you're caring about is your family, but not the place you live in, right? And so pick a thing you care about and push it. I think the other piece is, this is a simultaneous equations problem, right? So you have to, because you're in a position of privilege, you have to work on an institution, but you can't forget the place you're in, right? So, the person who's helping us on this call has a family in Portland. Care about the place, take care of it, but also run this call. And so it's another paradoxical issue, which you're gonna have to live at 100,000 feet and on the ground at the same time. But welcome to the 21st century, I think, really. Back to imagining, this is your imagination question, right? It's an interesting thing to put together the levels of analysis implied in what we have to do, right? That's an act of imagination that is really kind of cool, by the way, and will be lots of fun, but hard.
Thank you, Blair, for calling out Miranda. Welcome to the team, Miranda. First day with us, helping us with this call. Other questions?
Lindsay, we have a question from David.
Go for it, David.
Blair, it's great to see you on the call, and I'm very energized by your call to solutions. I'm intrigued by your comment about trade-offs, and I wonder if you'd just reflect on what you think the most challenging trade-offs that you're seeing in a massive global corporation. I'm going to guess 200,000 or so people, or maybe more. What are the trade-offs that you think that organization is going to have to deal with that are the most challenging, and what's the pathway inside of that ecosystem to make those changes happen?
Yeah, so I think the first point is we have to put "and" in the sentence more than "or." Because I think the degree to which we think of it as a trade-off problem, we actually will find, we won't solve the problem, and B, we'll find resistance. So think about the 4 crises themselves. You can't solve the climate crisis and drive more people, increase disparity in the world, right? You can't fix institutions and not solve the 2 core challenges I described, right? So in a way, we have to put "and" in places where we typically put "or." And so one of the ways to think about it is, if you think about COVID itself, there's a massive number of short-term issues we have to address, which is, how do we fix the national budget crisis, for example, for most countries? How do we get small business started, whatever it is? And we have to rethink the future at the same time. What that says is, we have to, as leaders, find a way to do the short term in a way to set up a completely different future. The trade-off happens when the incentives or the stakeholders don't buy that premise. And so I think in a sense, for us, what we have to do as PwC is really work on 4 different constituents at the same time. We have to have conversations with shareholders or those with capital to say it is in your interest to take care of these issues, because actually the long term is becoming the short term, and you don't want to make a lot of money this year and have nothing 10 years from now, right? We have to have a conversation with policymakers, we have to have a conversation with ourselves, and we have to have a conversation with our clients. That's and the risk is you go so far, you lose them. So there's a balance in that that's really critical.
Right. Let me bring in Graham Ward now with a question. Graham, if you come off mute and ask your question.
Lindsay, thank you very much. And Blair, thank you for being so thoughtful in what you've been saying to us this afternoon. If we could just build a little bit on your issue of globally minded localists, because one of the ways in which people tend to react to adverse circumstances is to hunker down in clans and become very, very local in their thinking and in their interests. So do you have any advice, experience on how to move people out of those shells and to focus on the bigger picture and to care about people beyond their clan? Because the fact is, if people don't care about people beyond their clan, then they're going to end up on the bad end of life, and we all need people to be more widely focused.
Exactly. There's a paradox in the point, right? Which is why we need people who can manage paradoxical leaders. So in the book, there's a story about a wonderful woman, a beautiful woman, who grew up in a small town, a mid-sized town in China, big town for the rest of the world, small town for China. And actually, because she loved the town, she came to understand what the world was about, because she understood the ways in which the town itself was at risk.
Right.
So I think the thing we have to do is actually think about place more than clan, and use the place to get people to understand actually the place exists in interdependence with the rest of the world. So while you're solving the local issues, it forces you to be aware of the global issues that are impinging on it, right? So if we ever need a lesson in local is influenced by global, it's COVID, right? But if you push it hard enough, you're just going to find that lesson again and again and again and again. So so I think in a sense, the other part of your answer to your question is, if we can focus on a place we love, we're forced to cross tribal lines because most places are composed of multiple tribes. Mm-hmm. So if I take my own town, every one of the politically challenging tribal issues in the United States sits in that town. Way easier to reconcile it when I'm sitting across the table from someone, if that ever happens again. But because I see them, I understand the issues they're dealing with, and I can empathize with them. And so you have to build in a sense, the kind of social competence to deal with those kinds of issues that you then just multiply at higher scales. And so the paradox is local will probably make us be more global if we do it right.
Okay. Got another question here, thank you for that, from Jaroslav Dokupil. He asks, or he says, Buckminster Fuller wrote in the early 80s that we already have all the technology we need to satisfy basic needs of every person on the planet. 40 years later, we're not much closer to that goal, even though our technology has advanced exponentially since then. And in many domains, we've already achieved unprecedented advancement. Why do you think we're failing so miserably in pointing our resources and capabilities at the right problems?
So it's a great question. I think part of it is the technology itself is causing us to define problems too narrowly, right? There's kind of a Gresham's law thing going on, which is hard drives out soft. And I can find a concrete data point or analytical solution to a set that's actually well-defined. And so we're actually breaking problems down in a time when we need to be building them up, right? So first point, if there's a message in the first half of the book, it's this is a system, people. And so understand it as a system. I think the second piece is that our technologists are not sophisticated humanists, and our humanists don't know technology. Right. And so we actually have to put the two together. So how many double E's do you know that actually study psychology, political science, sociology, or history? How many psychologists, sociologists, political scientists actually studied electrical engineering? we need people to be able to carry both of those thoughts in their head at the same time, which Lindsay has a really interesting implication. It says, you know, we used to teach for years, play to strength as a leader. Today, we've got to teach mitigate weakness. Discover the thing you're no good at, hire someone who is, and respect the heck out of that person. Because if you don't, you're not going to solve the right problem.
Right. Great. Now let me call on Fields. You've got a question.
Hi there. Yes. Before I ask my question, as a Tar Heel, born and bred in Chapel Hill, where do you call home now? That's not my question, by the way. I'll come on to something else. Less important.
I'm afraid to say I taught at Duke for 32 years. I live in Durham. I call North Carolina home. I hope you're not a real Tar Heel. My wife taught at Carolina for 2 years and then left to Duke, and so you would really hate our family if you're.
Oh dear. No, I wouldn't. No. My brother was also at Duke. Anyway,
Durham. I call Durham home.
Good. For those of you who don't know the localities, Chapel Hill, my hometown, and Durham, Blair's town, are arch rivals in everything. But
yes,
we accept all Tar Heels. Good.
Exactly.
So my question, and I've been listening intently, and of course, as you know, if you listen, then you can't really think about your own questions. So it's not going to come out as a beautifully articulate, flowing, eloquent question. I was really struck by your different paradoxes, and made a couple of notes on the second one or the third one about integrity politicians. I mean, for me, what really resonates, and this isn't where my question is, I'll come to the question, but what really resonates is, and I've seen this over and over again, when someone exudes, I'll say emanates, exudes clear and unselfish intent.
Yes.
Everybody knows it.
Yes.
Right. They don't have to say it. It is just, we absorb it. And if, you know, if we were golden retrievers or whatever, our ears would go, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's what we mean by integrity. You nailed it better than I could ever say. So thank you.
Well, it's just, I've seen it in practice, and you know, one always tries to live up to the highest standards, but I think that's what we really, really need. Now, my question really is more about your first paradox and humility. And humility is something that I learned from well, I haven't yet learned it. I'm still learning from my North Carolina farmer father, who was born in a log cabin and never lost his humility throughout his life. And I always admired him because I couldn't understand how he could not have lost his humility, but he was very special that way. And it made me think of an incredible interview visit afternoon I had probably about 15 years ago. I'm looking at Lindsay, who may remember this. Jema, I'm not sure if you would or not. When we were just beginning to do our Leaders' Quests in Brazil. And I had spent some time in the Amazon, and I had heard about this unbelievable scientist. He was the most well-known biologist in Brazil on what was happening in the Amazon. And I thought, right, I really want to meet this man because there's a lot for me to learn about the Amazon, and not only being the lungs of the world, but the kidney and liver of the world. So when I finally tracked him down, it turns out he was no longer based in the Amazon. He was at the Brazilian Space Center, the equivalent of NASA.
Yeah.
Because he said, I know everything there is to know from the ground up. You know, these people are looking from the stratosphere down. And they're not going to come to me in Manaus. I need to go to them. So he went to them, and that's where he was. Which comes to my question. And it made a huge impact on me. And this was, as I said, about at least 15 years ago, maybe longer. I think, Lindsay, I don't know, maybe 2003, 2004. We were talking about the evolution of man or woman, humankind, sapiens, and talking about the sciences and how every science over the past 100, 200 years, barring one, has had fundamental shifts in changing the way the scientists viewed their discipline and the universe. You know, complete upside down, inside out, total revolutionary changes of perspective. And he said, the only science that hasn't had that is biology. Because, and this, I'm misquoting him, but it gets to the point of humility. Because, and I said, yes, and I was in learning mode. He said, well, because for humans to accept that their theories are wrong about how they evolved, they would have to accept they are dependent upon not only other humans, but upon all different systems of life on the planet. And to accept that, they would have to accept their interdependence and their vulnerability.
Yes.
And mankind, humankind, is not very good at kind of unzipping and saying, oh my gosh, I'm really vulnerable. Which brings me to my question, which is, given your paradoxes, given the fact that this is the biggest social experiment, let's hope it's just an experiment, the world has ever gone through. We have billions of people experiencing for the first time in their lives vulnerability. Shared. I mean, every vulnerability is individual, but it's all shared.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to understand what other people might be feeling like more often than we have.
Yeah.
What do you think is required for us to be able to capture this social, global sense of vulnerability, to be able to come out of this, not just going to our default button and doing what we've always done, but actually being able to accept that we are dependent? And those of you who might have seen biodiversity and mass extinction over the weekend will know kind of where I'm coming from. But I think, as you said, time is running out. We don't have time, and therefore we can't just always do things as we've always done. We really do have to shift. So what do you think is required?
Yeah, so let's do it at the individual level and then the societal level, right? Take the person you gave as the example. He was comfortable enough in who he was that he could permit the things he wasn't. And so there's this kind of irony, which is if you think about interdependence right, it actually should make you feel better about yourself rather than worse. But we think about it in a way where it causes us to feel worse. So we actually have to reframe interdependence. So for example, just simple issue, I'm better because I'm married to the woman I'm married to, right? I'm better because I have the kids I have. I'm better because I have the grandkids I have. And actually, they on a regular basis remind me all the ways in which I'm inadequate. But that doesn't bother me, right? It's actually endearing and makes me feel better about the few things I do okay, right? And it turns out what I learn is I don't have to do that much because I have these amazing people around me, right? So the issue is, how do you take that kind of thinking and apply it to other species and the world at large and say, actually, it's okay to recognize we're interdependent, because it doesn't, in a sense, destroy any place we might have. It actually makes it bigger and richer because we're part of a larger thing, right? So the other analogy for me is that if you think about teams, there's a reason people love being on teams, and it starts with the phrase, I'm part of something bigger than myself. So if we can get people to think of the world that way, then actually it stops being so scary. It actually becomes kind of cool, right? And so it's a reframing problem, I think, right? So that's the individual issue. At the societal level, I think we have to both scare ourselves and excite ourselves, right? So I hope I did the scary part, right? And I really mean, we probably have less than 10 years, right? Because with COVID, it may be 8, right? And it's a massive task, but then there's this amazing thing on the back end of that, which is, imagine what life would look like if every one of the villages and towns and cities we lived in were thriving. Imagine what it looked like if we lived kind of comfortably juxtaposed with nature. Imagine what it would look like if we were thoughtful about what technology was doing and we therefore applied it in the right ways. Imagine what it looked like if we could actually rethink our institutions and take them back to the reason they were in the first place, and they did it so well. Just imagine what that would look like, and it's pretty damn cool. right? So in part, we have to be able to scare ourselves to excite ourselves, right? And then I think it gets back to the other piece, which was the first question. I use the word imagine a lot in that answer, right? So let's become curious and then just imagine what could be. And the potential on the back end of that is astounding, because the danger is when we think about interdependence, we close things down. We don't open things up. And all of us have an experience of a relationship where, because of that relationship, we can do what we're good at and be great, and we can let someone else do the thing we're no good at. And that opens potential, it doesn't close it, right? So I know that's kind of an obvious answer, but I think it's a reframing problem, really.
Thank you. It's a wonderful note on which to end. I know we're just over time. I want to say a very big thank you. This was such a rich conversation. I know people have really appreciated listening to you. You're such a thoughtful person, but also, as I said earlier, deeply practical. So I thank you for everything that you've shared. I encourage people to get the book. It's absolutely well worth it. We'd love people to hear your thoughts, share feedback on social media with #LeadersLink. We'd love to see you at our next Leaders Link, which is October the 20th. We're taking a little pause before then. But in the meantime, I would love to see you on 10/10/2020, when we'll be launching countdowns. So please, open to everybody anywhere in the world on YouTube. Just go to countdown.ted.com to sign up. We'll see you there. I actually think this conversation is a wonderful kind of precursor to what we're going to share that day. Thank you, Blair.
Thanks, Lindsay. It was fun, and good luck. Good luck with next week. It's a really important event, and I hope you push the ball forward in a big way next week. So, and thanks for inviting me. I had fun. Great questions.
We will. Thank you all. Take care, everybody. Great rest of the day.